Hey everyone, I'm Mrs. Bartolotta. I teach 9th and 10th grade English. I'm going to be reading the first chapter of the book, Daughters of Sparta by Claire Heywood. I chose this book because I do a lot of work around the idea of Greek mythology and heroism or heroes in my classes. And this book has to do with the Trojan War. And it just seemed like a good read to me. So here we go. Clytemnestra, Chapter 1. Clytemnestra! Have a care, girl. Your spindle's gone all a wobble. Clytemnestra's eyes snapped into focus at the sound of her name. In front of her, the spindle bobbled, her carefully spun wool unraveling quickly. She stopped it with her hand. Not like you, Nestra, tutted Tekla, turning back to her work. The crease in her nurse's brow lingered, but at least she had returned to calling her Nestra. Clytemnestra had never really liked her full name. It was too big, too cumbersome, but she liked it even less on a sharp tongue. It was her sister, Helen, who had taken to calling her Nestra when she was too young to manage the whole thing, and it had stuck ever since. Helen was sitting beside her now. They had been working wool together all afternoon, and Clytemnestra's arms were beginning to ache from holding up the distaff. Her sister was singing a song to herself as she watched her spindle twirl on its thread, and though Helen had a sweet voice, she only knew half the words and kept repeating the same verse. Clytemnestra's wish was that she would stop. The women's room was dim, the walls plain, the air thick and still. As one of the innermost rooms of the palace, it had no windows through which daylight might spill, nor any fresh breeze to break the stagnation. It was summer, and the warm air was made warmer still by the many women who filled the room, lamps and torches illuminating their dark heads and their white working hands. Clytemnestra's woolen dress clung to the sweat of her back as she looked over her shoulder toward the brightest corner of the room. There stood the looms, 3 large wooden frames with half-finished cloth stretched across them. Only 2 were being worked at present by the most skilled of the household slaves. Admiring and envious, Clytemnestra watched as they led the shuttles back and forth, building their clever patterns thread by thread. It was like watching a mesmerizing dance or the playing of a complex instrument. You know, came Tekla's voice, we could start you on the loom really soon. Really? Asked Clytemnestra, pulling her eyes from the dancing hands. You're 11 now. In a few years you'll be married. And what kind of wife will you be if you don't know how to weave? I would like that very much, she replied with a grateful nod. Working the loom certainly looked more interesting than spinning. Helen stopped her singing. Can I do weaving too? Clytemnestra rolled her eyes. Helen always wanted to do what she was doing, even though she was 2 years younger. She hadn't shown the slightest interest in the loom before now. I think you're still a little young, Mistress Helen. You'll get your chance soon enough, though. Helen made her face into an exaggerated pout and turned emphatically back to spinning. Clytemnestra knew she would soon forget she was supposed to be sulking, though, and sure enough, her face smoothed as her attention became absorbed once more by the motion of her spindle. The 3 of them continued working for a little while until Tekla said, I think that's enough work for one day. Why don't you girls go and find some food? Clytemnestra stopped her spinning. Can't we go out and play outside for a little while before supper? It's not dark yet, and I can't stand being indoors all day. Ooh, yes, can we? Piped Helen. Tekla hesitated. I suppose so, she sighed, but you must take a slave with you, so that you're not alone. But we'll be with each other, Clytemnestra protested. It's no fun when there's someone watching. She gave Tekla a pleading look, but the nurse's face was unwavering. Fine, she said with an indignant huff. We'll take Agatha. The girl was between her and Helen in age, and a better playmate than any of the sour-faced escorts Tekla might have chosen for them. The nurse looked unconvinced, but she nodded her assent. Agatha, we're going outside. Come with us, Clytemnestra called across the room before Tekla could change her mind. The slave girl shuffled over to them, head bowed, while Clytemnestra took Helen's hand and headed for the door. The three of them were already halfway down the corridor when Tekla called after them. Keep close to the palace, and don't stay out too long, or you'll be brown as goat herds. And who will marry you then? The three girls left the palace and walked down the hill to the meadow, Clytemnestra leading the way. The grass was high, the dry seeds brushing off of her dress as she strode through it. The sparse trees rustled above their heads, and she was glad of the fresh breeze on her arm after so long in the woman's room. Once they were far enough away from the palace not to be overlooked, she stopped. What shall we play? She asked the other two. I'll be a princess, said Helen without hesitation, and Agatha can be my handmaid. Agatha nodded shyly. But you are a princess, said Clytemnestra, exasperated. Don't you want to pretend to be something different, like a sorceress or a pirate or a monster? No, I'm always the princess. All right, fine. Then I'll be the king, sighed Clytemnestra. She had learned that it was easier just to let Helen have her way. Otherwise, she would start crying. Helen snorted. You can't be king, Nestra. You're a girl. Helen looked over at Agatha, encouraging her to join in with the joke. Agatha let out a quiet giggle, but clamped her lips shut when Clytemnestra shot her a scornful look. Agatha looked at her feet. Fine, then. You can be the princess, Helen. Agatha, you be the handmaid, and I'll be the nurse. She thought for a second. But I'm a nurse who can make magic potions, she added. What are you playing? The voice came from behind them, a boy's voice. Clytemnestra spun around to see who had spoken. The boy was sauntering toward them through the long grass, now only a few paces away. He was a little older than they were, tall, but without his first beard. He had long, dark hair and a smile that made Clytemnestra suddenly shy. She had seen him arrive at the palace with his father a few days ago. Some sort of diplomatic visit, she supposed, or maybe just passing through. People came and went all the time, on their way through the mountains or coming up from the coast. Her father's hearth was always lit, but it was rare to have a guest so young. Usually the only noble-born boys around were her twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, but they were too old to play games with her and Helen. And Tekla said it was unseemly for princesses to play with the slave boys. Surely they could play with this boy, though. He was a guest. Hello, said Clytemnestra, her tongue suddenly clumsy in her mouth. We were just about to play a princess game. She cringed at how childish it sounded and hurriedly added, It's just silly, really, but Helen wanted to play. We can do something else if you want to join in. There was that smile again. No, a princess game is fine. Clytemnestra was worried he was laughing at them, but at least he wanted to play. What's your name? She asked. Theseus. My father and I are visiting from Athens. Theseus? She repeated. All right, well, Helen was going to be the princess, and Agatha, she's just our slave. She was going to be her handmaid, and I'm a nurse who can make potions. What do you want to be? I'll be a foreign king, a great warrior. Clytemnestra smiled, pleased that he seemed to be entering into the spirit. Well, how about you get shipwrecked on our shore, and then I'll find you and heal you with a potion and... But Theseus didn't seem to be listening. He had turned away from her and was looking at Helen instead. You do indeed look like a princess, my lady, he said with an exaggerated bow. You've got the brightest hair I've ever seen. He raised a hand as if he might touch it. It's like fire, and your skin so white, like a real lady. I bet you'll be as beautiful as Hera herself when you're fully bloomed. Helen giggled, but Clytemnestra was annoyed. People were always commenting on Helen's hair. She didn't see what was so special about it, and her own skin was just as fair as Helen's. Besides, she was nearer to full bloom. Helen's chest was as flat as a boy's. She tried to bring his attention back to the game. Anyway, I was thinking you could be shipwrecked, Theseus cut in. How about I've just arrived from battle, and I've got a wound that needs herbs to heal it. You have to go and fetch the herbs. All right, Clytemnestra smiled, glad he had given her an important role. I'll go and do that. She walked a little way from the others toward the river, imagining herself venturing into the mountains on the quest for rare herbs. She could hear Helen ordering Agatha about as she stooped to pick a plant with small white flowers. She went on a little farther until the rush of the river's flow replaced Helen's commands and giggles. She stooped to wash her hands in the clear water when the wool grease clung to her skin, stubborn as ever. There weren't many interesting plants by the river, but she picked a few wildflowers and grasses nonetheless. She wondered if she'd have to pretend to put the poultice on Theseus's wounds. The thought made her nervous, but a little excited too. She never touched a boy before, other than her brothers, and they didn't count. When she was satisfied she had found enough magic herbs, Clytemnestra gathered the stems in one hand and headed back into the heart of the meadow. But as she drew closer to the place where she had left the others, something felt odd, and then she realized she could no longer hear Helen's voice. She lengthened her strides. As she drew nearer, she found she could not see Helen either, nor Theseus, nor Agatha. She scanned the meadow, squinting in the light of the lowering sun. She broke into a run. Panic was rising in her throat now. Stupid, stupid! She should have never left Helen. If anything happened to her, it would be her fault. They were supposed to look after each other. What if a wolf had come, or a boar? They didn't usually dare to come this close to the palace, but it wasn't unheard of. Or what if they had been captured, taken by slaves or some foreign wanderer seizing the opportunity? Theseus wasn't old enough to fight off a full-grown man. She thought she must be at the place where she had left them by now. Still no sign. She kept running. Suddenly her foot caught on something, and she tumbled into the grass. "Ow!" came a small voice. Clytemnestra sat up and saw what she had tripped on. "Agatha, what are you doing lying in the grass? Where's Helen?" The slave girl was holding her stomach where Clytemnestra had kicked her. Wincing, she said, "She's playing with Theseus. She said he was kidnapping her, and he stabbed me, in the game, I mean. And he said I was dead now, and I had to lay down and be quiet. I heard them run off, but I don't know where they went. I was being dead." Clytemnestra's stomach clenched. "You stupid! You can't let Helen be on her own with a boy?" She jumped up. "We're going to be in so much trouble," she moaned almost to herself. Agatha's eyes had grown wide and fearful. Tears started to shine in them. "I'm sorry, mistress. I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I was scared of him." "Sorry's no use," spat Clytemnestra. "We need to find them." She cupped her hands around her mouth. "Helen!" She took another lungful of air. "Helen!" She scanned the meadow, turning until she had come full circle. There was no sign of them, or where they might have gone. She started to run. Better to look somewhere than nowhere, but stopped after just a few steps. "It's no use running after them. They'll be lost too, and no one will know what's happened. We need to tell Father." Tears were running fiercely down Agatha's cheeks now. "But we'll get in trouble," she whimpered. "It's too late for that. Come on!" Clytemnestra grabbed her wrist and ran toward the palace, dragging Agatha behind her. Clytemnestra had been locked in her chamber for what felt like hours, though she could tell from the light that the sun had not yet set, so it couldn't have been very long at all. She wished someone would tell her what was happening. Had Helen been found? Was she all right? She didn't even have Agatha with her to share her anxiety, her guilt. Father had kept the slave girl with him when he shut her in there. He had been so angry when they told him. No, not angry, afraid, perhaps. She'd never seen her father afraid before. He had sent Castor and Pollux out on horses, and half the palace guard on foot, too, to look for Helen and the boy. Time passed. Clytemnestra fiddled with her hair, pulling it, tying it in knots. She sat hunched on the edge of her bed, thinking about all the things that might have happened. Even if Helen and Theseus were safe, Helen was still alone with the boy. Clytemnestra knew what boys did to girls, what men did to women. Tekla had explained it all to her when she had asked why the sheep climb on top of one another. And if that happened to Helen, well, she'd never get a good marriage. Clytemnestra felt sick. She had let her sister down. She was usually so responsible. Helen was so young and sometimes foolish, but Clytemnestra had always been there to keep her safe. She'd been so stupid today, though. Why had she been so desperate for Theseus to like her? He was just a stupid boy. Helen meant more to her than any boy, more than anyone at all. She started to cry. Silent, angry tears. angry at Theseus, angry at stupid, beautiful Helen, angry at herself. Then she heard the door bar being lifted. She quickly wiped the tears from her face and stood up. She hoped with all her heart that Helen was about to walk into the room. But when the door opened, it was Agatha who stumbled through, pushed from behind. She let out a pitiful yelp, and then the door closed behind her. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy. She staggered forward a few steps, then stopped, as if she couldn't go any farther. She stood frozen, steadying herself against the wall with an outstretched hand. "Agatha," Clytemnestra asked wearily. She could tell something was wrong. The slave girl had been crying when they told her father about what happened. Irritating, fearful tears that she had no time for. But the fear that filled her eyes then had been replaced by something more unsettling now, a hollowness. Clytemnestra took a step forward, and another. It wasn't until she was level with her that she saw it. Illuminated by the flickering lamplight, Agatha's narrow back had been stripped with gashes. Streaks of nauseating red burst through her shredded dress. Her shredded white skin. She had been beaten then. This was what she had been so afraid of. "Oh, Agatha," gasped Clytemnestra. She moved to embrace her, but stopped as she saw the girl flinch. "I'm so sorry. I should have told him it was my fault, too." "He knows it was your fault," Agatha said dully. "That's why he sent me in here, so you'd see." Clytemnestra looked at her confused. "He couldn't beat you," Agatha murmured. "You'd get scars." All at once, understanding rushed upon Clytemnestra, and she hung her head. Her father was punishing her through Agatha. Her stomach turned at the thought of it. He probably beat her harder than just to make that point. She needed to see the pain. He wasn't a cruel man, her father, but he could be cold when he needed to be, and his children's safety was very important to him. She wanted to hold Agatha, to bathe her wounds, but she was afraid of hurting her further. "Do you know anything about Helen?" she asked quietly. Agatha shook her head, eyes lowered. More time passed. Occasionally, Agatha would whimper, but apart from that, everything was silent. The two of them sat on Clytemnestra's bed, waiting. Agatha's blood was dripping into her bed covers, sullying them. But Clytemnestra didn't care. She took Agatha's trembling hands in hers. There was a noise from the corridor. Clytemnestra's eyes darted to the door. Please let it be good news. Please let her be safe. When the door opened, it was her father who stood in its light. "We found her," he said, but he wasn't smiling. His brow was creased, his face tired. His eyes flicked to Agatha and away again. He looked sad. He stepped to the side, and there was Helen, looking bright-eyed as ever, if a little sheepish. She trotted into the room, and their father withdrew, closing the door behind him. As soon as the door shut, Clytemnestra jumped up and hugged her sister. "What happened? Where did you go? Are you okay?" She looked at Helen, and then she looked her up and down, searching for signs of injury. "I'm fine. Theseus and I were just playing. I don't know why everyone got so scared." She flicked her hair back from her shoulders. "He kidnapped me, and we found a cave downriver, and we hid there." "But did he touch you, Helen?" Clytemnestra asked. "Touch me? That's what Father wanted to know, too. He shook me hard when he asked me. It hurt." She rubbed her upper arm, frowning. "But did he, Helen? Did he touch you?" Helen rolled her eyes. "Yes, he touched me. He held my hand when we ran away from Agatha, and then when we were in the cave, he stroked my hair, and he kissed me," she said with a shy smile. She blushed, but there was something else in her expression, too. Clytemnestra thought it looked like pride. "He kissed you? And that was it? Nothing else happened?" Helen looked more worried now, seeing the corners of her sister's face. "Well, he asked me to sing for him, and I danced too, and then Pollux found us." She started to get upset. "That was all. He was nice. He kept saying how pretty I was. And now Father has sent him away, and I bet it'll be ages before there's another boy to play with." Truly, Helen, that's all that happened? Clytemnestra pressed. Helen nodded. Then all is well, she sighed with relief and allowed herself to smile. Nothing bad has come of it after all? But as she said it, as she questioned it, she remembered Agatha sitting behind her. She wasn't sure Helen had even noticed she was there. So I can't wait to see what happens next. I hope you guys pick up Daughters of Sparta by Claire Heywood and find out for yourselves.